She thought she was being careful, late-night whispers on her phone, a new password she'd never mentioned, and smiles that didn't reach her eyes. But the moment her phone lit up with a single text from a name he didn't recognize, everything changed. He wasn't prepared for what he'd find, and neither will you. Where did trust break in their story? Let's uncover the truth. James Carter stared at the glow of the television, the muted sounds of a late-night sitcom doing little to distract him from the gnawing pit in his stomach. Across the room, Emily sat curled on the couch, her phone angled carefully away from his view. She laughed softly at something on her screen, a sound that once brought him comfort but now only fueled his unease. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed the change. Over the past few weeks, the distance between them had grown, not physically, but in ways that felt harder to bridge. It started small, texts she wouldn't explain, a hurried lock on her screen when he entered the room, and vague answers to simple questions. Work stuff, she'd say, flashing him a quick smile before turning her attention back to her phone. But tonight was different. Tonight, the tension hummed like a live wire between them. When she excused herself to the kitchen for a glass of water, she left her phone on the couch, its screen lighting up with a notification that caught his eye. A message from someone named KT. James's chest tightened. KT wasn't a name he recognized, not a coworker, not a friend. His pulse quickened as he glanced toward the kitchen, hearing the soft clink of glasses. The temptation was too strong, the questions too loud to ignore. He reached for the phone, his fingers brushing the cool surface. The lock screen refused him entry, her new password barring him from answers. His heart raced as he returned the phone to its spot, guilt and suspicion warring within him. Emily returned moments later, her gaze flickering to the phone before settling back on James. Her smile felt different, forced, as though she knew what he'd seen but dared him to question it. And James, caught between his love for her and the creeping shadow of doubt, said nothing. But in his mind, a plan was already forming. The following evening, James sat in the dim light of their bedroom, scrolling through old photos of them on his phone. Each image, beach trips, lazy Sunday mornings, laughter-filled dinners, felt like a snapshot of a life that now seemed distant. Emily had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, and her phone lay charging on the nightstand. This time, James couldn't resist. His hands trembled as he picked it up, the faint buzz of the charger vibrating against his palm. The lock screen stared back at him, a wall he wasn't sure how to breach. But then he remembered something, a detail from a conversation months ago when they'd set their passwords together. He tapped the screen, entered the digits, and held his breath. The phone unlocked. What he saw made his heart drop. The messages were hidden under a generic app, one he'd never noticed before. Inside was a string of conversations, names he didn't recognize, words that felt like daggers. Emily's tone was warm, flirty, a side of her he hadn't seen in weeks. One thread stood out, the name KT glaring at him from the list. James hesitated, his finger hovering over the chat. When he opened it, the truth hit him like a freight train. Inside were late-night plans, inside jokes, and an intimacy that had been stolen from their relationship. His grip on the phone tightened as his breathing grew shallow. He glanced toward Emily, sleeping soundly in their bed, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. In that moment, James felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief, his love for her battling against the betrayal that now stared him in the face. Morning light crept through the curtains, but the warmth of the sun couldn't thaw the chill between them. James stood in the kitchen, gripping a mug of coffee he hadn't touched, his mind replaying the messages he'd read. When Emily entered, her usual morning cheer faltered at the sight of him. His jaw was set, his eyes cold, and she knew instantly that something was wrong. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "Who's KT?" Her eyes widened briefly before she recovered, her expression shifting to one of confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone light but unconvincing. James set the mug down with a deliberate clink, his gaze never leaving hers. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages." For a moment, Emily froze, her mind racing for a way out. Then she laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. James, you went through my phone? That's a huge invasion of privacy. Her deflection only fueled his anger. Don't turn this around on me, he snapped. Just tell me the truth. Who is he? Emily crossed her arms, her demeanor shifting to defensive. He's no one, just a friend from work. The words felt like a slap, their simplicity mocking the depth of his pain. Friends don't send those kinds of messages, James said, his voice breaking. You lied to me, Emily. How could you? Her denial crumbled under the weight of his accusation, and for the first time, she looked away, guilt etched into her features. But even then, she refused to give him the full truth, her excuses and half-apologies only widening the chasm between them. Emily left for work without another word, leaving James alone in the apartment that now felt like a shell of its former warmth. He paced the living room, his thoughts racing as the weight of her betrayal pressed down on him. Every memory they'd shared felt tainted, every laugh and touch overshadowed by the messages he couldn't unsee. He tried to distract himself, cleaning, cooking, anything to keep his mind from spiraling. But the silence of the apartment only amplified his thoughts. He found himself scrolling through her messages again, his heart breaking with each word. The depth of her deception felt suffocating, and he wondered how long it had been going on, how many moments of joy had been built on a lie. By evening, James sat on the couch, staring at the darkened screen of the TV. He thought of confronting her again, demanding answers, but a part of him already knew it wouldn't change anything. The trust they'd built had been shattered, and no apology could piece it back together. Days turned into weeks, and James began to rebuild himself piece by piece. He leaned on friends he'd neglected, finding comfort in their support and wisdom. He began journaling, pouring his pain onto the pages in a desperate attempt to make sense of it all. The process was messy and slow, but with each passing day, he felt a little lighter. Looking back, James realized that the cracks in their relationship had formed long before the messages. He had ignored the small signs, the moments when communication broke down and trust began to wane. The betrayal hurt, but it also taught him the importance of honesty and vulnerability, the foundation of any lasting love. As he stood by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, James felt a sense of peace. The pain would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was stronger now, wiser, and ready to move forward with a heart that knew its worth.